Hi, my name is Benedict. This video is to introduce and be the manual user guide for my R3-500 analog rooms reverb unit. We will start in the fairly traditional sense of running through the presets, because I made you a folder of presets. Not that I recommend you use these presets in your mixes, because that's kind of contrary to how reverb is done, but I know that people want them. So, caveat out of the way. We will run through initially with drums, we'll run through with synth. Yes, if you don't want to hear those, that's fine. Skip forward, everything will be noted for times. We have a very carefully put together sequence using a semi-random drum generator. There is a repetitive synth line, and then of course there is the device. Obviously not all patches are going to suit all situations, but we'll run through drums because it's a fairly easy way to hear what's happening. There, presets. Obviously not suited to drums at all. Showing that we can get a kind of backwards effect. This is a good drum room. Maybe a little heavy-handed in the mix, but it does make a nice intimate space just around an instrument. Showing that we can get a little bit creative. Same sort of thing. A lot of brightness. See how it makes the kit brighten up. And back where we were. We can listen to the same things. Again, if this is boring for you, skip forward to the section where we get into more detail. So synth sound designed to have edges and a bit of movement at the same time. Same presets. Hear how that carries it forward really nicely. Creating a sort of a proud feel. Adds character to the sound. And back to the start again. Yes, a bit boring, but there isn't a demo of this. There are plenty of other freebies that I have made to show my style, and this is dirt cheap. So that shows you how it's likely to interact with your devices. We've got this split into 3 sections. A little unusual in reverb. Normally they split into 2 sections. I've split into 3. We've actually got 3 echo creation points here. And unusually for me, there's actually diffusion in these, all pass being the method for diffusion. It's rare that I use that at all, because if you watch me, I tend to use very clattery, early reflection-y kind of stuff, despite the massive lengths that I use on my reverbs. But I figured it was time to use an all-pass method, because sometimes it is really good, and it gives you the ability to have something a bit more intimate. But where I used everything 100% diffused, I became very unhappy with the reverb. I felt like it just delaminated. So the original sound and the reverb, while the reverb was super smooth and washy and it didn't sound like it connected. And to me, it's really important that these things connect, because the relationship has to be clear so that the user feels that there is this sense of depth. So some of these taps have the diffusion on them, some of them do not. So the 3 sections, we've got early, mid, and late. You get to set every tap in here. There are the 3 sections, and then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Why I called it 5, I no longer remember. I think maybe because I added an extra tap in the process. Each section handles stereo differently. The first one just sums to mono. This is normal for units of the sort of vintage that I'm emulating here, or playing with. And to say emulating is not fair, because this isn't an emulation of anything, but the idea of the feel of. They would come in, they would sum to mono. And before you say, but that's not right, it's like, well, it's right for the time, plus we've got to understand that if we're in a room, this room that I'm in here, how many rooms are there? Well, there's actually only one. There's one Benedict and one room. While stereo is created, the sound that goes into the room kind of smushes. Therefore, there is nothing wrong with summing to mono at some stage in a reverb. So we sum to mono here on the early. And we can listen to the level mix of each of these. As you hear where we get very close, we actually get a chorus. So it's possible to use this as a chorus. It's not the easiest thing to use as a chorus, but it is possible, and chorusing is a really important part of getting the reverb sound that works, sounds great, adds richness and depth, and I like. So we've got from 0 to 125 milliseconds. That's 120 being the classic official slapback sound. And Decay has 2 purposes. 1 is feedback, and 2 is that it starts to introduce the diffusion. Now, it is common that at 100% the sound will kind of break. But I wanted to give the ability to go all the way out there, because somebody's going to want to use that break. Sooner or later, someone's going to say, circuit bend it. So cool, it's there. It's not a flaw, it's a definite decision to go there. You will notice that the taps are more definite, and especially once we get over 50%, they start to get more smushy. That will be more obvious with the other sections. That is part of the diffusion thing. So that's our first round of taps, of echoes. We can mix that, obviously. Our next are the mids. The mids are fed by early. So whatever we do in early, the mids are listening to that. The mids are not listening to the original signal at all. They are listening only to early. You may say, but that breaks a room slightly. It's like, yeah, but it creates a wonderful sort of a sound because it creates a much richer sound. So if we look at mids, we've got 125 milliseconds here. So if we have 125 here, this becomes our pre-delay. So early also sets our pre-delay. As well as creating an echo of its own, it creates the pre-delay for everything else. So be aware when you're setting this that it's going to impact this and move the whole reverb back in time a little bit. Really important because it gives a sense of the overall size of a room, so the first returns. It also can give you some separation between the original sound and the beginning of the reverb so that you get less clugged up. So up to 125 milliseconds or up to 500, I think. Yes, 500. Now we can set each of these taps individually as to what we want them to do. So that is a stereo multi-tap. These two are on the left-hand side, over there. Too hard. And these two are on the right-hand side. They're hard-coded that way. So stereo comes in, goes to mono, goes through the early. Mono comes out of the early and then is just split and sent to these 4 taps where you can decide how you want your timing to go between left and right. And again with that slightly smushy sound. One of these has no diffusion, the other has diffusion. So if it's a closer, more normal sort of room type space, diffusion's a little, it delays a little high. Dry. This is a really nice around that sound kind of feel. We can change the relationship between L1 and L2, R1, R2. So we've got the first stage of the mid and then the second stage of the mid, and we can change the relationship between them. On this end, it's 100% L2 is reading what's coming out of early. So it's complete 4-tap, multi-tap delay. They are unrelated to each other than that they're being fed by the same thing. If we move to the other side, then L2 and R2 are being fed by their relative 1. So this stage now 100% feeds this stage. Hear how the shape of the room changes. Puts an emphasis on later. This allows us to change the shape of the room. If you're looking for a bloom in your room, as in the room starts a little quieter and then goes, then move this some or all of the way back. Even, well-behaved room. With a little bit of bloom. Obviously, you can mix and match. So you can use a rhythmic feel within the room. And no, none of this is or will ever be tied to BPM. If you want to make the rhythm of the room suit the rhythm of the piece, by all means. I do that with delays and echoes all the time. Do it by feel, because it's got to groove with your piece. And if you just take the lazy route of going BPM sync with everything, you think you're grooving with your piece, but you've got no actual groove, because real grooving is how you move around the literal points in time. So if you want groove, make it, because the way you make it will define your sound and your feel. With very short times, you will tend to get a little bit of whine. That is normal for this, and if you focus on that, it becomes a problem for you. If you accept that it's there and you work with it, it's a lot of the reason why records like Steely Dan and Doobie Brothers sound so great, because they're working with the sound that they're getting from their units. It becomes part of the piece, part of the performance. Then we've got late. Late is long, up to 250 milliseconds. And again, it is fed 100% by mid, which is being fed 100% by early. So if we're listening to only late, we can naturally hear everything else being echoed back. There are a couple of ways to use late. One is to be able to say, okay, that's nice, I like that, but I feel like it finishes too soon, and when I turn this up, I kind of don't get the results that I want. I want to change the shape of that tail a little bit, in which case we bring in late, and add a little bit of late to allow it to extend. And if you're thinking, oh, but it just creates another. Where is it here? It just becomes part of the echo. We reduce that. We've now got quite a large room. With a really nice feel to it. So play with your late as a way of extending your early to mid, or use it as a very obvious kind of a slapback. So if you want the emphasis to be on your late, hear how that creates this sense of a cavernous space in the distance. Obviously we can reduce its level. And with the right performance, the right song, the right story, very, very cool. Obviously, we can change the shape. The shape, remember, only affects the middle of the room, but it will then affect because it's being picked up by the late. Again, we can get into and we can get that fairly typical floaty sort of sound. That's really extending what we've got. But it's not that kind of smoothness, which, as I say, I always feel never really connects to the donor sound. We have then got this EQ section, which is very unique. Not just unique, it's very unique. Deliberately so. We've got the obvious controls, so we can roll off the low end. Part of the uniqueness of this is that it does it before early. So it does it before the signal gets to any reverb. So you will find that it feels different as you're using it. You're used to this either being in the middle of the reverb loop or after the reverb loop, but this is before anything happens at all, which means that it will feel slow. Especially if you've got that really long kind of reverb. Your reverb is reacting to this from the beginning. And you might say, but that's a really strange way to do it. Yes, it is a strange way to do it, but it also helps control some of the ickiness that easily gets into high repetition of feedback. So it's part of the sound of the unit. If you don't like that, I guess you could just set everything to kind of off and then handle elsewhere. There is also this dip. Now this should, you would think, be called mid, and it is the mid EQ control, but it's actually a band reject filter. So a band pass says here, we'll get rid of everything on the outside. This says no, we'll get rid of everything in the middle. So the signal is there on both sides, but we're just cutting a hole in it, literally cutting a hole in the signal at the frequency point that we choose here. Let's go shorter. So it seems to work almost opposite to the way you're used to. And it's not a dip, it's just cutting a hole. So if we want our room to sound like this, that's now created that sound. If you don't want to dip anywhere, probably the safest place to put it is down to nothing, because chances are you're going to be wanting to roll off some of the low end somewhere. You can also consider putting it right up top, because again, most of the time you're going to want to roll off some high end. This is very noticeable with drums. So if we pop these guys back into play again, no, not you, and actually not electric piano, drums. So if that's the sound that we want to have our room feed back, it's a story we want to tell of the space which we're in. Then that's how we get there. It is deliberately quite a different approach from usual. So spend some time getting used to how that works, because you're going to find that you get different results. The whole idea here is to create different. And that's not a sound that you're going to get quite the same way from the typical perfect reverb unit. You've then got this modulation, which is quite simple, but is implemented in a way that's a little outside of the ordinary. Modulation rate, it's limited, it doesn't go everywhere, and depth. And again, it's limited, doesn't go everywhere. It's set to serve a purpose here without getting into weird or wacky. If you want to get into weird and wacky, working on the assumption that you have a DAW that allows such things, then bring your CVs in and assign them to things like early and make the early leap around, and the whole rest of the reverb's gonna do things like that. That will get more chorusy if you want than this. This is designed just to work in this purpose. There's a stereo relationship, but it's not done in the usual way. We're creating stereo, you create stereo with your times here. The stereo relationship is that early and late, the LFO is going one way, the mid, it's going the opposite way, but remember, these are all feeding whatever comes after them, so you end up with a fairly complex set of shaping in there. The idea is just to subtly add that bit of richness out of a chorus. Rather than to really chorus, because I would be chorusing at the instrument, and I would also be adding echoes at the instrument. So they're feeding this, which means that this has got echo taps already that it's going to pick up and smushify as well. Therefore, you end up with much richer. I don't do all my reverb at here. I do a part of it at the instrument with echoes, and then this picks that up and becomes very rich and very deep. And of course, we've looked at the mixing, so that's listening to your early, listening to your mid, listening to your late. The submix of those goes to your wet. So I would recommend when setting up a reverb to put this on your send, because I always set my reverbs on sends. I have very few reverbs on instruments. Again, I use echoes at that point. So I would be using my send to that, return here. Reason's great because you can flip across to here, just listen to your return, and then I would be listening 100% wet, set up the balance that I want, not the mix that I want, the balance, saying okay, going, okay, that's super great. You can choose to do it another way, but I would be saying basically the easiest, safest way is to set whatever you want to be the loudest to 100%, and then these relative to that in your room shape, and then balance it here. If you're finding that you want to change that balance, then you're making finesse movements. If you find that it's not right and you're starting again, pull out the dry, turn up the wet, reshape your signal. Okay, that's the space I want. And that way you'll get a better result every time. If you are using this as a send, as I encourage, obviously you want dry to be down all the time because you're just returning this signal. And my advice again is not to do all of your balance here, but to get the sense of what you want as the signal that's coming back, and then balance on your desk. Up to you how you do it, but that's my advice from, well, doing this all the time. Remember, the aim here is to create the room space. And room spaces are unique and invariably tremendously flawed. If we think of a real cliched jazz club, it's probably not well shaped, as in it's not a perfect square or a perfect rectangle. It's probably got weird angles and bends in it. Chances are, left of stage, that there is a door that goes into a back alley where interesting things happen. And that's where we use our timings here and here and here and here. And then our late. is the far end of the room that's bouncing back, or oddities like the open doorway into the alley out the back. So we can create very interesting shapes. If it's a more intimate room, chances are it's going to be shaped like this. If it's a kooky room, then maybe more like this. And we can really define the feel, the shape, the overall what this room is like. And of course, as we get into our, if there's a lot of furnishings, we can thin our sound down. We might even be processing our original instrument in such a way as that it sounds a bit warmer already. And that's creating a feel around that instrument. Very dry. And that's neither right nor wrong, which is why I'm opposed to the usage of presets, simply because we've got to decide what's the story of this song, what's the role of this instrument in setting the scene, and building our reverb around that. And this is a really intriguing space that you can use to build everything from close drum rooms that you then feed into your drum bus and off to the bigger reverb, or to build, like this is an electric piano, we can have our greater reverb unit and then say, okay, I'm going to build a little bit of space around that. And that goes to the echo for the unit and then off to the bigger reverb. And therefore you get this wonderful sense of depth, space around each instrument. And when the mix comes out, there's this big, rich feel around it. That's the whole purpose of this. This is designed for my client work. Plus, I'm going to use it all over my own records as well. If you have any questions, please pop them down below. Don't go asking me privately, please. If it's a public question that you have, other people will have that question, so the public answer is useful for everyone. If you haven't come here from Coffee, then you can purchase this unit at Coffee. The link will be down below. It is dirt cheap. Again, if you feel the need to test some of my stuff before you invest $1 with me, fine. There are freebies on my site or splattered around the net which show you my style of how things get done. Get out there, have fun. If you do make a record with this in any significant sort of a way, especially in a way that we're going to hear, link that below too. We love to hear that.